second one is how I work. Control over, like, I'm accountable for these results, yes, but let me have some control over how I get to them. I'm an expert in my field. I know what I'm doing. I'll ask questions if I need to, but let me get to that outcome I need to get to and leave me a little bit of control. And you can do that.
Welcome to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am Trent Cotton, your host and human capitalist. Ask yourself, is your HR organization future-proof? Well, we are going to dig into that very topic in this episode. In this podcast, we are going to tackle all of the topics that keep business owners and HR professionals up at night, from AI automation to transforming your workforce to meet the needs of the future. So, if you have employees, you're going to want to follow along and take a lot of notes. So with that, buckle up, get ready. It's time to dig into this episode and transform you into a human capitalist. Let's go. All right, welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I have got someone who, ironically, he was actually my first podcast back in 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. So we kind of fell in love over data. So I am so excited to bring on my best friend whenever it comes to all things data, Mr. Ben Eubanks, and fellow Alabama boy.
It should
disguise the dialect there.
Okay, if you're from Alabama, it should come out feller if you're going to do it
Feller. Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Fella is the polite way of saying it. So, Ben, thank you so much. I've always been a huge fan of all of your work, and I've appreciated how much you've invested in me. We were talking right before we joined. I said, this is so weird. I'm interviewing you. It's usually the other way around. So this is going to be fun.
I know. Being on the other side of the microphone, I look up to and respect you. You got a note from me recently. Hey, I'm thinking about what's next for the research. I'm pinging you for what are you hearing that's top of mind? Because you always have some mad science idea in the top of your mind that I want to know this, I want to know that. And so when you and I met the first time, I was like, this is meant to be. I was so excited. I still am today.
Same. Well, I appreciate it. I am so excited. So I like to ask the same two questions for every guest. So let's just jump right in. The first one is, well, actually, I'm sorry. I know you. The audience may not know you. How about you introduce yourself? We're just diving right into the data like we always do.
I'm always guilty of that too. Like, let's get right to the good stuff. So really quickly about me, I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a researcher, and I live in Huntsville, Alabama. Always have and always will. So I spend my days as the chief research officer for Lighthouse Research and Advisory. And that's all really a fancy way to say that I'm a data nerd. I love collecting research on what's happening in the workplace with the workforce across TA, talent acquisition, compensation, learning development, all those different things that HR leaders out there listening to me right now. If you have that idea, like, I wonder, like, I have those same ideas, but we have a way to get the answers to that. And so I love being able to do that. I've written a couple of books. The last bestseller was called Talent Scarcity, How to Hire and Retain a Shrinking Workforce. The one before that, currently working on the third edition for the AI in HR book, really trying to unlock the value there and understand what's happening in a practical way, written by someone who was actually a practitioner. So when I started working in HR early in my career, I was actually a recruiter of Black Hawk helicopter instructor pilots. So I've been there, done that, got the bruises.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's one of those things that I love pointing out. The first time I ever got a rec, I was just in an HR role and said, hey, you're going to start recruiting. I'm thinking, okay, I'm excited. Give me an accountant. Give me an admin, something that I actually understand. And like, no. Find this UH-60M instructor pilot. I said, I know what that means. Like, oh, that's a Black Hawk helicopter. Okay. So I had to go find one of those in my very first role I ever had to fill and learn from the ground up how to do that well, how to connect with people, build relationships, all the stuff that we know leads to great outcomes in the recruiting side. I had to learn that way. And so I get a lot of joy out of bringing that insight back to all of our friends out there, Trent, that are doing this hard work every day.
Yes, absolutely. And I know you've shared your story a couple of times about what was it, filing or something in the HR room, and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore.
I was
telling always sticks out.
I was telling someone the other day, I said, listen, I started out like all of us did, like learn the ropes in that. And when I told that company, the first job I ever had, I said, hey, I'm going to be leaving, take another job. They met together. Let's do a huddle with HR team, figure out who's going to take over Ben's job. And after an hour of deliberation, they decided 80% of what I was doing didn't need to be done anymore. You're like, I don't know if I should be happy or sad about that when I'm walking out the door. So
Yeah, that's a little bit humbling. Of going, okay, I really was wasting. But I mean, think about it. It was affirmation that that was the time for you to move on because they were not utilizing all of your resources. Now, I know that you are a big time dad. So, how many children?
At last count, at the recording of this podcast, at the last count, we
Yeah,
have 4.5 kids. So we're
four
currently
and
in
a
the
half.
process of adopting a foster daughter who's been living with us for the last few
That's awesome.
months, and that process is ongoing. So she's a 3-year-old firecracker. So in the middle of all that, and the other kids are 8, 10, and 14-year-old twins. So it's a
Oh,
wild and crazy time in the Eubanks house.
gosh, and you still have energy to do all this fun research. You're my hero. I have my one, she's 21, and I like things the way that they are. I've actually told her, I was like, if you could wait about 10 years for grandchildren, that would be great. I don't know,
You
because I mean, I
expect
grew up, yeah, but I mean, I grew up the oldest. I was the second oldest of like, I think there's 15 or 16 grandchildren. I mean, I've always been around kids, always liked kids, but now it's just like, I can't do this. I have my little routine now in my life. And so, all those years that I made fun of my parents, I am now becoming them going, I like my space. I like my space clean.
hey, it's
So,
quiet. That's kind of nice.
yeah, yeah. So you also accomplished something personally, a kind of a major victory recently. What was that?
So this year, I finally ran and completed a 50-mile race. I've been trying to do that for a couple of years. Last year had big plans to do that, and of all things, broke my big toe trying to show off for a bunch of kids at a trampoline park and could not run the race last year. So this year, I said, I'm going to be smart, be careful, and ended up finishing that. So first thing my wife's like,
Congrats.
hey, 60 next year. I said, be quiet, go away.
Oh
So
my
like,
gosh.
no.
No, 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 no. No. Yeah. I can't even imagine that. I know my CEO is he already ran a marathon and I think he was 8 minutes over his time. And so now he's running another one in December to see if he can shave the 8 minutes off. I'm not a runner. Put me in the gym. I'll be in the gym hour and a half, 2 hours. You make me run, you're not going to like me. So,
That is one thing I do know about Trent. Trent is more of a gym rat than
gym
a
rat.
treadmill jockey. So that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. And it's weird too, because I'm one of those weirdos that I'll listen to podcasts. Like a lot of times I'm listening to your podcast, Benjamin Minna and Chat and Cheese, a couple of other my favorites. And, it's just so weird because it's like, my husband will look at me, he goes, are you okay? I said, I'm listening. Like, like you'll pose a problem and you're really digging into it. I'm like really thinking.
Mm.
And I never understood why people would always come up and talk to my husband and not to me until the other day I was working out by myself and I looked in the mirror and I was like, oh, that's why. That face,
Look,
that's
that
why.
focus face, you're so
Yeah,
serious
yeah.
over there. You're like,
Yeah,
I'm
because
not
I'm
in a bad
like,
mood. I'm just like tuned in.
no, 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 no. And that's what I tell him. I was like, I'm not even here. Like I am so into whatever, the podcast is talking about. And a second ago I was looking because I've got your AI book sitting on my bookshelf. It's one of the 10 that sit on there that I constantly, I mean, it's marked up. There's post-it notes and everything on there. So if you haven't gotten it, well, actually they should wait for the next edition. When is that going to be done?
You know what? The publisher would be happy if they did both. The third edition of the book is going to come out third quarter of 2025. So it's going to be
So
out
go ahead and
around
get the real
September.
one and then read the update later.
Yeah, just in time for me to hit the speaking circuit in the fall, do a speaking tour. I'm still trying to talk the family into let's rent an RV and do a speaking tour and go all up and down the East Coast. And
You should totally GoPro that too. Like
I
do a
am
whole YouTube live thing. Oh, you could
that would be a
totally do
ton of
that.
fun. I really am. I'm thinking hard about it. We've done like the Texas loop from here in Alabama. We've done a northern loop up into Illinois and Indiana and everything and Ohio,
Hmm.
but we've never done the East Coast. So we're thinking about that as an option. I'm trying to like listen.
You're
It's work
brave.
related. It's business related. Like we can make that happen.
Yeah, you're brave with four and a half children. Wow.
Goodness gracious. The line between bravery and stupidity is very fine, my friend.
Very fun. It is. It is. So I will let you continue to test that theory. That's a data point that I don't want to test. So, all right. So you spent a lot of time talking to various levels of HR. I am a huge proponent of it's time for HR to evolve. So how do you view the world of human capital? I even want to get away from human resources, human capital. How do you see it changing over the next 1, 5, 10 years, however many, based on where the data is leading you?
So it's a great question. And I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is within the next year, we're going to see a lot more leaning on things like AI and all the other stuff we've been talking about a lot lately in the market. So a lot of leaning on AI, but not for flashy, generic stuff, not just for, oh, I need to screen more candidates faster. There's lots of good use cases in and around recruiting and learning everything else, but I'm seeing some really intriguing ones in areas that most people wouldn't even like blink at, but that are exciting because they're these very fundamental parts that have always held us back. And we're like, we always had this party line, Trent, of, hey, AI can do this stuff so you can be more strategic. And you're like, yeah, but I can't do these things that are still part of my job. So I talked to a company the other day as an example that has built an algorithm that looks at all of the documents, the freelance agreements, the contracts, all those sorts of things when you are working with people who are not employees, and looks at all those for compliance purposes and says, hey, listen, Trent should be classified as an employee because he hits these thresholds. Or Trent should not be. Oh, look, there's an amendment to that statement of work, and now he's crossed the threshold to be an employee. You can't pay him as a contractor anymore. Like that sort of thing right now is being done by some poor person who is manually reviewing all those things. And that's the kind of example of AI really getting deep into the areas of the work we're doing and helping us to fundamentally change some of those things. I don't want to be a compliance oriented HR function, people function,
Yeah.
human capital function, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to be a compliance oriented one that's focused on all the numbers and the gosh, no. None of us got into it for that reason. We sometimes have to do that as part of our work, whether it's part of our job or the entirety of our job. I still am like amazed at our friends out there who are focused on like workers' comp and stuff like that, things that make me want to poke myself in the eye.
Oh my God, no.
But those people, if they were able to have some of those things handled and they got to focus on the other parts of the work that really do engage them, bring out their best creativity, their best effort, their best energy, that's the vision. And then in the next year, I think we're really getting to that point. It's been steadily building in the last few years, and I feel like we're right there at the cusp of it. Now, the 5-year vision, you would love this. I was talking to one of the workforce planning leaders at Walmart recently. We're talking about
Walmart.
what's possible. Yes, what's possible. And one of the things that I felt came back to after discussing this with him a little bit on some of the things that are going to evolve in the space is it feels like as more and more of those things are automated, we're going to spend more of our time thinking about the experiences we create, whether it's in a recruiting context, an onboarding context, other pieces. Instead of it just being, well, here's the process, it is what it is, we'll be able to think about how do I design a process around Trent that brings out, brings a smile to his face, that makes him thrilled about this change. We can't do it every moment, but that time that we're really trying to make sure and hook into that energy, the value of emotional connection, the data and the power of moments sort of ties into it's going to be unexpected, tied to an emotion.
Right.
And we'll be thinking about those sorts of things more strategically and designing experiences for people that engage and delight them. And that is tremendously fun to me. That excites me because it's no longer just great, HR's here, but like HR's here, what's possible now? Or the human capital team is here. What's possible now? I get excited about that sort of thing. And I think that's where we're going to go. And based on some of the conversations I'm having with people that are thinking about the bigger picture of what skills are evolving and changing and adapting, that sort of thing looks like it's on the horizon.
It's funny. I was talking to another guest earlier, and they made a comment whenever they kind of went through some of the same as your answer, but they said, I think that we are entering the golden age of HR. I was like, that interesting, like unpack that. And, it comes down to the people function will be able to focus on people. Totally new concept.
No.
I know, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. But, and it's funny because it's changing our behaviors just at a micro level. Like I did a lot of content work and stuff over the weekend, and I found myself talking more to the AI than I did to my husband who was here. Because I was like, so how should I do this? What do you think about this? Read this. Is there a better way that I could be assertive but still there? And it's like I had my own little coach there, and I was just interacting the entire day. And it just made me stop and think, wow, this is only 18 months in, and now you would take AI out of my cold, dead hand. So it's going to be interesting to see even where we are this time next year. So
Can I challenge you on that real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
You okay with that? Okay. So there's some new data coming out from the University of Toronto that says people who are using tools like ChatGPT and others are less creative overall. And so the thing that concerns me with that is if we're already struggling for relevance, for credibility. Like HR
Mm.
has that battle in a lot of organizations today. And if we're losing any measure of creativity, of innovation we're bringing to the table, that may not cost us something today, but it's going to cost us something long term in our ability to stand out and be effective. So I think the answer for that part of it is we have to use these carefully. We can't just ask it for an answer and then I'm going to do a little bit of fine tuning and go, or ask it for only use it for new idea generation because we're missing the chance to create something ourselves, stretch that muscle ourselves. It's like any other muscle. You let your creativity muscle atrophy, Mr. I'm going to the gym, and you're going to get weaker in that. So we have to be careful not to use it for everything all the time because our brains are wired. We all know this, to be lazy. If I
Yep.
don't think it's important, I will quit doing it and I'll focus that energy somewhere else, the calories somewhere else. One of the things I learned from you all these years ago is you have a limited amount of energy and focus every single day. I've heard you say that so many
Mm.
times. And I understand the need to protect that. And I agree with you, like using this as a sounding board, great. We've got to also be careful where we go over the line and just start letting it automate our life and some of the
Mm.
ideas and some of the things we're sort of bringing to the table in terms of value. So it's not necessarily a get rid of it or hang on to it anyway in spite of it, but somewhere in the middle we need to think about those things and be more careful and deliberate about it would be my encouragement.
Duly noted. And you also forgot the other thing. I think it was from our first or second time that we spent on a podcast. I love technology that can enable me to be lazy but look efficient. So you just kind of hit me straight to my hill. Like that bullet landed.
The swelling will go down.
It will go down. Yeah. So let's talk about something other than me. All right. So you've got a lot of recent studies. I know we've been going back and forth, but like, what are some of the most challenging issues in HR right now, according to the data?
Goodness. So according to the data, there are a couple different things that stand out to me. I was talking to someone the other day that said, what are your predictions for next year? I'm like, I'm always hesitant to make predictions because
Especially now.
someone's like, well, what could change, what will be. And like the only people that can always be wrong and still have a job are weather forecasters and economists. And I'm not one of those. So I want to be careful about that. What I think we need to be thinking about as priorities for all of our friends out there doing this work every day, a couple of things. Number one, in our big study on recruiting this year, the number one thing that recruiting teams said they're working on into the next year, of all the things in the recruiting spectrum, number one was onboarding. Thinking about how we transition from this amazing candidate experience we've spent so much time and effort crafting into the experience of an employee. We can't leave that to chance. We got to make sure that link is strong and we pass them off so that they stick around and they quickly start performing well. Again, thinking about them in terms of the human capital lens, we don't take a machine we just invested in and say, let's try to, very gently ramp this up and maybe get fully value out of it in 6 months. It was like on day one, how can we get as much value as possible?
Yep.
And that's the thing we're seeing there.
I
On
like that.
the learning front, one of the big things that we're seeing is that companies are saying, great, there's a bazillion tools out there that will extrapolate skills and infer skills, everything else. How do we prove it? How do we know? And so how do we get past this? Oh, yes, we looked at Trent's resume and here's all these different skills to let's actually validate what the 3 or 5 strongest skills that Trent brings to the table. So we know when this task comes up, we can give it to Trent and we have confidence knowing it's going to get done right. Not just because Trent did this in one job three years ago, did one time and spent 3 weeks on it and it made it to a bullet point in the resume, but it's not a skill that Trent would call a strength. So how do we know those sort of things really validate the skills? So those are a couple of things we're seeing. Again, I told someone the other day, I want to do an entire session on 2025 and 2026 plans and all that stuff and say, without using the words AI or skills, how can we talk about all the things that are happening? Because those are the big things that sort of stand out as focal areas. And I'd love to talk about these other things. There's lots of other stuff that's happening. And again, the AI stuff I mentioned earlier around automating some things that we don't even think about. Like those things really are differentiated and exciting. They get lost in the noise of some of the other flashy stuff that's happening.
Let's unpack. You already talked about one of them being compliance. What are some of the other ones that just kind of made you go?
On the AI front.
Yeah, AI front.
Yeah. So there's a company that I ran across that I picked on our friends who are doing workers' comp. So I'll throw a bomb. So a big part of workers' comp is safety and what's happening in the business. And so there are new AI tools that are using computer vision to watch the workspace. Let's say you've got a warehouse, people are working in there. Well, you have a human person come in and train it on things to look for. Hey, this is a safety line. Someone stepped over that without wearing their hard hat. Someone drove down this blind corner and didn't slow down. Like whatever those things are, a human notes those things that are safety issues. And the AI watches and can let you know before Ben gets run over by someone driving a forklift or before someone is injured or hurt. The AI can say, we saw this thing, go take a look at it. And that feels kind of big brother. But the trade-off is you are less likely to get injured, hurt, potentially killed on the job. I have a good friend that is on a board of directors with me, and one of his employees last year was killed in a workplace accident, complete freak accident, and they're in this plastic recycling plant. And to this day, he still has employees that are struggling with that and trying to deal with that. He's like, if there was any way I could have prevented that, I would have been happy. I would, have gone all in on it. And this kind of thing for me is an example of how AI is being used in creative ways that don't make the headlines, but are really having an impact on people's lives and their safety at work.
So kind of like a Minority Report, the movie with, who was it? Tom Hanks? Not
Tom Cruise, yes.
Tom Cruise.
Tom Hanks would have been hilarious.
That would have been funny. That would have been a really weird one, but like that
Woody from Toy Story is solving crimes before they happen. Let's make it happen. There's a snake. There's got to be a snake in my boot.
Yes, there's going to be a snake. But
Yes.
To me, it is interesting because I think I shared with you, but I was talking to another company that really kind of focuses in on two different aspects. They're trying to determine where they want to go. So do they want their technology that can evaluate soft skill and things like confidence level, critical thinking, passion? Do they want to do it on the interview side or do they want to do it on a coaching side? And so, they were kind of coming to me going, all right, which way do you think we should go? I said, I'm going to need you to unpack that technology before I give anything, because like how could it do it? And so they were unpacking the technology behind it. And honestly, I was thinking to myself, okay, whenever I'm talking to someone, whether I'm recruiting or if I'm doing a performance coaching, I realized how hyper aware I am to their facial expressions, to their word count, the inflection of the voice. Are they sitting into the camera? Are they kind of leaning back? All of these different things that the AI is able to measure and put something to and give it a score. Like it kind of blew my mind. Like just like you said, the possibilities are absolutely mind blowing in our world.
Can I throw one more at you really quick? So I talked to an organization the other day. The guy that started the company used to work for Workday and spun off his own company, and they're in the learning space. And so let's say that anyone out there listening right now, you've got that manager that's got to deal with a situation they've never dealt with before. Mm-hmm. And you can role play with them, but it's still kind of weird and awkward trying to do that with a manager. So this tool lets you say, okay, I need an employee. They've been here 3 years. Their performance has been slipping for the last 6 months, and they're a little bit belligerent about it. I programmed that script and now lets the manager go in there with voice and interact with that avatar, with that algorithm, just like that was a person. Every answer is going to be a little different depending. If they run it 3 times, they'll get slightly different answers. But how do I coach them? How do I guide them? How do I tease out what's wrong with them and help do that? The data show, Trent, that even if everyone out there listening to my voice, we do it all perfectly. If we get the benefits right, the comp's right, the culture's great, all those things, it still only counts for about 30% of someone's satisfaction on the job. 70% comes back to that manager. And so how do we get that manager plugged in and engaged and enabled and capable? And so often that's left to chance, or it's left to we gave them the PowerPoint on how to be a manager. Surely they're good.
Yeah.
We know there's so much
like
more
they
to
looked at it. I mean, that's the thing is that I find that a lot of the HR organizations, they just push this content out and they're like, hey, we gave the manager this 16 bullet point, 16 page thing. They should know how to do it, but no one's coming in behind and going, okay, let's break this down. This whole concept, I love when you do that.
My goodness, you can.
Yeah, I know it. But like the whole concept of apprenticeships, back in the day, they were onto something. Because you learned by doing with someone who had been doing it for years. There was things that you couldn't read. It was you learned by doing. And we have gotten so away from that. But I think back to that human need, there is something. I want someone to sit on that first coaching with me and who's done this numerous times before. And I feel safer, because I know that if it goes sideways, I've got a safety net because Ben's on the phone. Ben's done this for 20 years. He knows just about anything that can happen. We just don't do that for our managers, and then we're surprised whenever our employees go, screw you, I'm leaving.
Yes. So I made that face a minute ago that you responded to because that's actually something we found in the research. I wanted to understand around an example of that is interview training.
Mm-hmm.
We so often assume that managers, oh, you're a manager at the last companies, you're probably okay at doing interviews. We don't train them on it. We don't teach them how. And so we actually looked at this. Companies told us in the research, oh, yeah, we do interview training. Well, how? Well, they sit in on one before they do it themselves. They just kind of watch and they're done. We don't have someone check on them. Or we let them, someone watches them, they give them feedback after they're done. Or we send them a PDF with some, click through this thing and it tells you the tips and the advice, but that's it. And what we found were the companies that did 2 or more of those, they started combining that. Those were companies that were more likely to say, we have managers that make consistently good decisions when it comes to hiring. So it wasn't one or the other, as you're saying. It's a combination of things. And especially if you layer in the experiential part of that learning where I get to sort of test it in a safe space and I get feedback. Hey, good job on asking that question. You missed a chance to follow up. They sort of left it hanging and you didn't follow up there. You could have really understood something more deeply. Next time when you get that, probe a little deeper. And those little sorts of things that a good interviewer will know, that's one of the things that stood out to me. And we've seen that in other areas as well in the last year around things like frontline manager training just on the job. If you're managing in a retail capacity or some other store, they're saying most companies tell us that when we're training people to be managers in that context, it's lumped in with everything else. So welcome to the company, Trent. Here's your discrimination training. Here's your harassment training. Here's your other stuff. Oh, by the way, you're a manager. So here's your other stuff on that. And it's just kind of lumped in there and it's lost in the noise. And they don't actually get us. Let's go take a minute and honor the position that you've just taken as a manager here. This is something we take very seriously. You have a major impact on the people around you. If you ever need help, here's how to get it, but here's what we expect of you. Start to lay those things out and really create that vision of what success looks like. There's a friend of mine, Maria Scott. She used to do manager enablement at Accenture. That was all she did, was how do we make managers great? And one of her biggest things she says that makes the difference after working with hundreds and hundreds of managers is help them know what good looks like here at your company. You know what that is, but if you've never told them, you're doing them a disservice.
Gosh, you know that I would much rather train someone than untrain them. God, I remember there was this one. Before I got into HR, I was a banker and did a stint in retail banking, managing bankers. And I remember this lady, the region that I took over, they had just recruited her, and she was the top performer at a competitor. And so they put her in one of my shops. And she and I just battled because I wanted to do something completely different. She goes, well, I was working for South Trust at the time, long time ago. And she goes, well, at AmSouth, this is what we used to do. And she just caught me on the wrong day at the wrong time. And then finally I said, then Becky, go back to AmSouth. We're not doing it that way here. It's not happening. And so she turned in her notice. And guess what? I hired someone from Enterprise that had fantastic sales skills, fantastic just client. They were caring, but they were driven. They wanted to be successful. Brought him in, and that person closed a year. What that lady who had been working in the industry for 29, he was able to get to her level in less than a year, which is mind-boggling. It was such a data point for me that just completely impacted my career. So I do think that the more that we can spend with our managers, I love that term, manager enablement. I love that. We don't do that. We suck at that because we don't have the time. We really just don't have the time.
Yes. Well, the simplest thing is don't just tell them what not to do. Tell them what you do expect. And when I'm speaking on this topic, one of the things I encourage all of our friends who are working in HR to do is we may not be able to affect every manager on a personal level. It's really hard to do. We got to make sure that the leaders are sort of flowing that down. One thing we can do is say, hold on a second. We just saw this amazing thing happen and we want to tell the story. We're going to elevate and celebrate the ones who are doing it really well because it tells others what we do expect and that we're going to recognize that when it does happen. So they're like, well, I want that kind of, attaboy, that attagirl, that pat on the back for doing a good job. And so we may not be able to, again, see everything that happens all the time. When you see or hear one of those good ones, make sure that you're elevating those stories because that is something we do control. We do have the opportunity to do that. And it helps us to make that a little bit easier for the others as well. Now I know why you were so excited when you said a minute ago, tell me how you're understanding someone's confidence, someone's capability level on that, someone's soft skills around that, the human skills, because really getting to those things does make a major difference, like the story you told.
It does. It does. And the ability to be able to rely on something like AI to be able to pick up on that. But you and I have often talked about just leveraging analytics to understand how to perpetuate high performance. What is, like you just said, what does good look like? And good can be a different definition at every company. What may be good for me, how I'm working here, my day job at Hatchworks AI may not be good at a Bank of America who has got a long, tradition. We're, a high growth tech company. It's a completely different culture. I thrive in it because we kind of have to make things up as we go along. And I like that. I like that veracity and that change. Bank of America, I would not be good because they kind of have an SOP for everything, So I think, one thing I'd love to kind of peel back from you is over, I cannot remember because I always look at all of your stuff, but there was one great question in one of your surveys. It says, what keeps your people from performing their best right now? Do you remember the answers there? I know I'm calling you on the carpet.
You're like putting me right on the spot. I was going to say,
Or
so
what have you seen in some of the data?
I'll give you some
Make
broad
it a little
things.
bit
So
more.
I'll
Yeah,
tell
yeah,
you.
yeah. Broad stroke it.
So we survey for the audience's benefit here. We don't survey 100 people a year and ask them what's up. We survey thousands of workers and employers every single year. So there's any given year we have 250 to 300 research questions going out
Hmm.
to employers and to the workforce, candidates, learners, so on. So there's always so much data. And the hardest part for me, this is gonna make you cry, Trent, sorry, is there's always something left on the shelf. We can't always get to all the data. We can't always use all the insights out of it because there's just so much. It's so rich. So what are some of the things that are keeping people from performing well right now? I'll go back to what I said a minute ago. Really know what good looks like. That matters so much. I've seen
Hmm.
that in my own experiences. I've seen that in other areas as well. And the data seem to reflect that. One of the other things that stands out to me is when it comes to unlocking the performance of our people is use the word honor a couple of times. Like honoring them and how they see work.
It makes
So
sense.
when we as HR leaders talk about flexibility as an example, we immediately think where someone's working,
Hmm.
right? Are you remote? Are you hybrid? So on. But there are other ways that the workforce, not just those in frontline roles, but all roles define flexibility. So the number one way they define flexibility is when I work. Do I have any sort of control over the time, the hours, the days, any sort of flexibility there? The second one is how I work. Control over, like, I'm accountable for these results, yes,
Hmm.
but let me have some control over how I get to them. I'm an expert in my field. I know what I'm doing. I'll ask questions if I need to, but let me get to that outcome I need to get to and leave me a little bit of control. And you can do that in almost any type of role, even people who are in an hourly capacity. There are ways to give them some control there. Other things that they say are flexibility in the opportunities to grow, opportunities to develop a skill. Let me raise my hand and say, oh, I want to get better at that. And then give me that chance to do it. In this new research we've just finished recently on learning, we found some things that set apart a great learning culture as an example. And one of those was autonomy. I have some choices. The other was opportunity. Do I have the white space to actually go and develop a skill? You can say, hey, listen, Trent, here's this big library of skills. You can go and take any of these courses you want in that 7 minutes of free time you have every week. You don't have the opportunity, you have autonomy, but not the opportunity. And so you got to give them both of those things. And so this concept of flexibility at work is something I come back to because it shows people, I see you, I understand you at this human level, because the things that matter for you may be slightly different than those that matter for me.
Hmm.
You said your daughter's 21. The things that you care about now in the stage of life might be different, or the kind of
Completely
company you're
different.
working in, high growth, different pace potentially. And so
Hmm.
those sorts of things fit in there. And seeing our people, letting them tell us what matters to them, that's one of the things that stands between their performance on the job and a company's ability to get the most from them at the same time. Seeing them, honoring them, appreciating them at that level, and then letting them speak up into those sorts of things is how we're going to get the most from them, because we're showing them, hey, listen, I hired you, Trent, because I believe you were the best one. Now, instead of saying, just do it my way, I want to say, I trust you to do these things within these boundaries to your best ability. And if you need help, let us know. We're here for you as a sounding board, as a backboard, as a backstop. But we hired you because we trust you. And so often it's, we hired you. Good job. Now forget everything that made you great in the interviews and just do this thing we're telling you to do, this process, this approach, this way, because it's worked for us for a long time. It's going to keep working in the future. And again, you and I both have that same mentality of, yeah, let me
Yeah.
prove it. Let me try something
Hmm.
different. And so many of our people may not be that in your face about it, but they still have that same let me spread my wings and sort of try this out my way. Let me sort of contribute in the way that I feel best. And so there's a couple things for you there around that. If we as HR, as an HR profession, as a talent profession, could just slow down a bit and see people for who they are and what they bring to the table, it would let them really play in what the author Gay Hendricks calls their zone of genius, the thing they do better than 99% of the people out there. And we would be thrilled for every minute they spent in that zone of genius, and they would too, because we're getting an outsized positive result from them versus putting them in a zone of incompetence just because we don't know them well enough to not put them there.
It's like that Steve Jobs quote, the stupidest thing is to hire a smart person than tell them what to do. It's just, that quote has always stuck with me. But, what you're talking a lot about is leading with context versus control. This is what I need. How you get there, I don't really care. But there is a time for leading with control, and there's a time for leading with context. And sometimes, too, depends on the individual. Some people, I know whenever I first started, I was used to very regimented, here's your first week, here's your onboarding, you have to do this meeting, and da-da-da. And so I show up, and so, I asked our CEO, I was like, so what's my week look like? He goes, this is choose your own adventure. You know who you need to get answers from? And I freaked out for a second. I was like, I don't know what to do. But then I was like, you know what, I kind of like this. I can determine my own onboarding. And then, too, I can't be blamed if someone goes, well, you should have known this. I'm sorry. Wasn't in my onboarding, I can
That
point
wasn't
back
my
to
to-do list. Sorry.
It's not in my to-do list that I created myself. What are some, you just mentioned another survey, that was a breadcrumb you knew I was going to follow. What are some other insights that came out of your recent study that someone who is sitting in HR looking at how do I remain relevant, what are some of the data points, I guess?
I mentioned the learning culture piece, right?
I love that.
Autonomy and opportunity. Those are some things to think about. So we call that an empowered learning culture. The opposite of that is learning, as we say here. We say fellers in Alabama. We also say whoop and stick. If learning and training is a whoop and stick, when someone messes up or they're not doing it right and you're going to use training against them, if that's the only time that comes out, then they're not going to see that as an opportunity to grow. Hey, you want to develop in this new role? No, absolutely not. Yeah. Because the last time someone got trained is because they were screwing up. So don't offer me those things. So you got to get to that perspective. A couple of other things. We have to know, again, go back to the context piece. Know your learners and know they're different. I'm not going to say there are multiple generations in the workforce because guess what? There have always been multiple generations in the workforce. For as long as work has existed, there have been people from age 20 to age 60 plus who have been working. It is not a new thing. Did I just break something? Maybe I did. I'm so tired of hearing that. If I can vent for 1 second. Because Trent, for the first time ever, there are multiple generations that are working. Tell me about the time that there wasn't. I'd love to hear about it. Let me know. Yeah. I will give you this. 300 years ago, people didn't live past like 40 years old. So there was only basically one generation of workers. But beyond that, in the modern day, yes, it's always been the case. Anyway, so know what those people want. An example of that is I was talking to a company recently at a conference, and their team, I don't have any experience with this, but their team builds and sells hair extension kits. That's what they do. Okay. And so they said, we don't have to train any of our internal people. We all know the product really well. We hire people who are experts in salon care, so on. But we have to train all of our customers how to use these things, whether they're an individual consumer buying off the internet or a salon owner in the middle of nowhere, Texas. They need to know how to use this so they don't mess it up and mess up the customer relationship. So how do we teach them those things? We have to know what matters to those different learners and how they engage with content and how they want to build a skill. And what we find is that different people want to build skills different ways. Some people want to see a course. Some people want to see video. Some people prefer to do a little bit of DIY, choose your own adventure. You used that phrase a minute ago. I love those books as a kid, by the way. Some people love that. Them. Choose your own adventure, experiential. Let me try this and see what happens. People prefer those different ways of learning. And in the research, we see that, for example, if you look at the broad number, hey, the number one way people want to learn outside of work is YouTube. Probably not a surprise. But when you break it down by age group, it's not universal. People who are Gen Z and millennial prefer YouTube over other sources. But if you are Gen X or you're a boomer, that group as an age group, and whether you agree with this or not, that age group says, I prefer more static resources, expert websites, at places where I can go to get information from other people that know what they're talking about, not a YouTube. So it's a little less dynamic. Okay, there's, again, strong following, but it changes once you start delving deeper. The thing that I talk about in that context sometimes from a retention perspective, knowing what matters to the different groups, is when you say, what matters? Work-life balance. That's the number one answer on the board. But when you go a layer deeper, you see that every single age band has a different preference for their top two priorities at work. Some say relationships, some say money, some say work-life balance, some say being able to have benefits that matter to my family. But it's not universal. Everyone cares about this one thing. So that if I had to encourage people to do something differently, it's do what Trent and I do naturally, build this new skill yourself to go one layer deeper in any data you have. If you do that survey and say, look, in our employee engagement survey, people said this matters. Go one layer deeper and say, does it matter to everyone? Or is it certain age groups? Is it certain demographics? Is it certain genders? Because when you see that, you're like, wait a minute, this only matters to the men. Do we want to do this because the women don't actually care? They care about this other thing. And taking that one extra step, I get, is hard. I'm not asking you to be a statistics whiz or an expert, but going one step deeper gets you past this. We see in the research that if you stop at that 40% of our people said that's the number one answer, you are, for all intents and purposes, disregarding anyone else who responded that was outside of that. We are not the kind of people that do that. We're the ones who want to know what others said. We want to know. Can we answer every question, solve every problem? No. But if you go one layer deeper and you see, hey, look, we can actually break this into two parts and be able to meet the needs of 70% of our people instead of 40%, and it's a more diverse mix, and we're respecting people, like suddenly that gets us excited. So that'd be my encouragement to everybody, just to go one layer deeper when you're asking a question, because you and I do that intuitively. Like, what's below that? What's below that? We'll dig endlessly. We probably have too much of that squirrels chasing squirrels thing.
I was going to say, we chase way too many rabbits on.
But for everybody else, that's a skill I would encourage you to build, because we're seeing the data, that the ability to look at data and make a decision based on that is increasingly important for someone who wants to be effective as an HR professional.
And one of the stories as you were telling this, and I'm sorry I did gank it from you because it's such a great story, is the one of Abraham Wald, looking at the wrong bullet holes on the bombers coming back on World War II, that survivor bias, that's always stuck out with me. And I was like, okay, but there's actually a scientific term for the rabbit chasing that I do. But, so let's kind of talk through that, because, you're speaking to individuals that I think in HR, I pick around, I joke, but there's some truth to it. I think a lot of people that really enjoy business when they were studying, and it's like, hey, I want to go into business, but they didn't want to do a lot of math. They ended up in marketing or HR, because you didn't have to go do all this heavy, crazy math. But that has changed in both of those worlds. I mean, you've got to understand statistics in marketing now more than you did whenever I went through college. And I think now in HR, you've got to be data. Our business executives expect us to be data driven, or at least data informed. What advice do you give to someone who just, like, I'm in HR, I like dealing with the people, I don't like dealing with the numbers, but my company's asking me to really get into the numbers? What are some things that they can do to help nourish that muscle, as you were referring to before?
If you are someone that heard Trent say that and you're like, I still don't need it, before I answer, I want to address those people really quickly.
Okay.
I had an amazing friend of mine, still a friend today. He's no longer in HR, God bless him, but I still appreciate him so much because he influenced my thinking early in my career. And I was reading his website, and I said, hey, listen, you're writing all this great stuff. Do you do any search engine optimization or anything like that? He's like, no, I'm not writing for a machine. I'm writing for people. I said, okay, I understand. Do you think what you're sharing is helpful and informative and it's going to inspire people? Yes. Do you think people are better off after they've read this? Yes. Then without changing it fundamentally, do you think it's worthwhile to try to get search engines to find your content so that you can help more people? Oh, well, yes. Okay. So I encourage you to think of it that way. Yes, just frame it. It's instead of just saying do it for its own sake, do it to an end that matters to you. And for all of you out there that heard that, think through that lens there. Using data doesn't mean that you treat people like numbers. You don't care about the human behind it. Doesn't mean that you're distancing yourself from the relationship side of HR. It means you can know them better. The example I gave a minute ago on the data set, going a layer deeper, you can suddenly see, oh, wow, the women in our workplace feel this way. I didn't realize that because it was hidden beneath that overall number. Now that we know that, we can have some focus groups, we can have one-on-ones, we can do some other things to try to make sure we're addressing that, because we want to make sure and either dispel that myth or make them feel more included. As an example of that, in the research, we found that women are 50% more likely than men to tell us in our internal mobility study that they don't have visibility into internal opportunities. I have a hard time believing that there is anyone out there that says, let's intentionally shut the women out so they don't see those.
Right.
Yet it happens. It happens through how it's set up. It's happened through the network. It's happened through some way it's occurring. And so once we know that, then we can take action on it. And if you're one of those people that said, listen, I don't want any numbers, stay away from the data, that stuff's just icky. I want the people side of HR, and you miss that chance to support and serve and care about your people, you're missing the chance. You're really missing the boat. So it's not about the numbers in place of the people. It's using the numbers to better serve the people.
That makes sense. And to plead your case and to speak the language of your client. They're in numbers all day long. Speak their language, get their attention. It's funny when you were talking through that. I think I shared before on another podcast. They're all kind of running together, but I love not just the data, but also manipulating it and try to get through that, kind of get to that, chase that rabbit. And the other day I found myself, we use Plum. And so I was looking at I did a mass export and I was wondering, what does our organization look like? And what is it by department? And so I was writing all these beautiful formulas in Google Sheets. And I was like, wait a second, why am I doing that? I took that information, dropped it into AI, and I was like, what are the top 3 drivers in the organization according to the data? What's our top drainers? Are there certain departments that have more of this versus that? And I was able to have that kind of conversational where I could chase that rabbit, but not necessarily have to do all the work behind it. So if you don't like doing all the work on the analytics side, you're living in a perfect age. Just drop it in there. Now mask the information. Let me just tell, because what you put out there is nice and open unless it's an AI that's sitting on your closed network. So just be careful of private information. But there are sources out there that can analyze this and put it in a way. And you don't have to be a big shop to be able to afford something like a Vizier, which is like a sexy product on all things HR analytics. So there is that option out there for you.
I would agree with that completely. Really being comfortable there. The thing that I tell everyone when I'm educating on AI, and again, I picked on it earlier a little bit because I still feel like it's a valuable tool, and that's a good example of that. You who are listening to Trent and I talk today, you are the expert on your business. You know it better than either of us do. And so you know how a process works. You know what happens next after this part of the workflow occurs. And the value in AI is knowing what questions to ask next, how to go deeper, how to go beyond that first prompt to the second or third one that we're like, aha, that's what I'm looking for. Your first question there, Trent, as an example, is not what's the biggest drivers, but what's the biggest drivers for this team? Are they different from that other team? Interesting. Help me compare on how I could get those 2 groups to come together and leverage those instead of them being a conflict point. And those are the sorts of things that really allow you to build this, to achieve that vision of great human capital management that we're all probably dreaming about. We've had since the first of our careers.
Yeah.
That value you want to contribute back to the business and the people, that's where you get to.
So is there another insight or something that you wanted to share with the audience on the last study before we jump into some of the rapid fire?
So the only other thing that I'll tell you is there's a broad concern. We talked about AI a couple of times. There's a broad concern from the workforce population out there. It's obviously different in different roles. But if you're in an operational position like marketing or sales or finance, or if you're in a role where you're doing a lot of work in a computer, like an insurance adjuster, things like that, those types of people are pretty concerned about what AI means to them, to their jobs, to the skills it's going to disrupt there. So if you have not talked to your people about that sort of thing, you haven't looked out there, unfortunately for us as HR leaders, sort of being double tasked with this. Know how to use it yourself and also know how it's going to impact your business and be able to have an informed conversation about that. If you have not had that conversation or thought about that with your leadership, I would encourage you to do that because the research shows about 7 out of 10 people are concerned about that right now. And they see learning as a way to hedge against that, which is good, but it's a chance for us to help put a fear to rest or to at least mitigate that somehow so they can focus on their work and do their best work.
Makes complete sense. And I think you can't shy away from this topic. It's out there. People are thinking about it. Just talk about the elephant in the room. And it's also okay to say, we do not understand or know the impact that it's going to have. But what we can commit is that today, if you don't know anything about AI or whatever, here are a couple of resources just to get you started. I mean, YouTube, it's the 2nd largest search engine in the world for a reason. Mm-hmm. I mean, it doesn't just help you learn how to repair a toilet or do a DIY project. There's stuff out there where people actually break down some of that in a way that's nice and bite-sized, and you can get over this fear. I know that's how I got into it. Actually, one of my team members got me into ChatGPT, and I was like, all right, this is cute. But then I went on YouTube and found out all these different use cases, and then my brain just went on fire. So, do you have a favorite AI tool that you use outside of like ChatGPT?
Probably Descript is the one I use
Okay.
most often. So I
What is that?
use it for audio and video editing.
Okay.
I can use it one click to find all the ums and ahs and everything else in a recording and delete all those, which a lot of them are mine. And
Same.
the other thing that I use it for is helping me to quickly summarize a conversation, make that easy to share back to an audience. So you and I create a lot of content, again, not for the sake of it, but for the hope that we're impacting anyone out there listening to our voices and listening to our words and reading what we're writing to help them be better. And so that's one of the tools I use for that. If you're doing anything like videos of employees or anything like that, creating that kind of content for employer branding or any other purpose, it's pretty powerful. It's called Descript, and you can find that
Okay.
and then online.
I have to check it out. You ready for some rapid fire?
Bring it.
All right. What is a book that changed your perspective on business or HR?
Probably Business and Work, 2 Awesome Hours was the first book that ever really did that for me.
Really? Why?
The book is written by a doctor, and he talks about how our brains work. And it reminds me a lot of your focus piece because he says, when you sleep, you reset that, but during the day, we have a limited amount. And so many of us jump into our inbox first thing in the morning, and you are unintentionally sabotaging the rest of your day. If you got that big meeting, you got to be on and focused, and you spend an hour in your inbox beforehand before you jump to that meeting, you've just used some of your decision-making power, some of your creativity. You've exhausted that on answering a bunch of dumb emails that didn't really matter. They could have waited till later. And so it talks about how to be on in the right moments, whether it's for me, if I'm speaking, I know for the last hour before, no email. For the last 10 minutes before, take a walk, no
Yep.
phone.
Yep.
And I know what works for me. And for everyone, there's a little different focus. So that's the best book for me in terms of just thinking differently about work and how to get the most out of my day.
Now, I will tell you that when I do, now the winter, I don't do it because I just don't even want to get out of the bed whenever it's cold. But like there for a while, I would get up and do fasted cardio. So I would put on, like one of my YouTube channels that I watch, Think Media, or, some of these different thought leaders and stuff. And I would lose 20 minutes just watching it, doing a walk or doing a brisk run. And I can tell you that mentally I was on fire by the time I got back. So, 8:30, 9 o'clock, I am firing on all cylinders. So I love that. That's great advice. What about like a favorite podcast or series?
It's the favorite podcast I used to listen to, the actual host of it. I listened to it every single week from 2009 until the host of it passed away last December. It was called 48 Days to the Work You Love. And I loved hearing about people talking about their work, talking about business ideas, talking about those sorts of things and the challenges around that. And he was one of those guys that had just this timeless wisdom. And I always learned something. And even though I'd listened to him for years, you'd hear something like, that's brilliant. And
Yeah.
so that was one. If you're trying to get a job, if you're thinking about those things, I'll say some of his advice around that was old fashioned, but it stands out in a digital age for good reasons. So I enjoyed that one for sure. I listened to Dave Ramsey's Entre Leadership podcast too, because it's about small business and how to run that, how to think about people problems and challenges. And there's a lot of HR things that weave through that, and it gives me a different perspective. Sometimes I disagree completely with what I'm hearing, but it makes me want to go through the mental gymnastics of how did he get to that? Would I agree with the output here? So those are some of the ones that I've listened to, and both of those are solo podcasts. They're not interviews or anything else.
Okay. All right. And then where can people find and engage you?
Couple places. I have a website out there, thebeneubanks.com. It's pretty easy. That links to some of the different properties and books and things like that I put out there. HRA for White House Research and Advisory is where all the research is published. And Trent is so joyful about this because we make it completely free for anyone out there who's doing the work of HR every day. Because I never had the research budget when I was working in HR. And so we make that available to anyone that wants to see it. And then you mentioned it already. I skipped over it in the intro, but I run a podcast called We're Only Human. You can find them anywhere you listen to podcasts. And if you are one of those people that sometimes needs a little pep rally in HR, I run an event. Trent has spoken for it before, so it's good, called HR Summer School. And you can look that one up as well. It's every summer it's a virtual event, 7.5 hours of HRCI and SHRM credits. And it's like half informative and half pep rally for us to remind us we're doing good work and we need some encouragement to come together as a community to remind us that the work we're doing is valuable and impactful for people out there.
And you usually do it, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like July, right?
It's
July,
June
August?
every year.
June.
Yeah,
Okay.
right around my anniversary, for
Okay.
better or for worse. So sometimes I've got to finish summer school and I'm like, all right, honey, let's get out for
Let's
dinner and
go.
whatever
Yeah.
else. But yes, it's right there first week of June, typically every year.
But I think that that's good because usually by that point you need a pick me up in the year because you
It
got a
started.
mountain. Yeah. Yeah.
I would say it started in 2020 when the world was kind of shut down and
Mm-hmm.
everybody was stuck at home. If y'all remember that feeling of like, oh my gosh, what's next for us? People were terrified. And so I did it then as a way just to give people something to do. And the energy around it was so exciting. People came back the next year like, oh, next year I'm a sophomore. Like, I'm like, okay, so they're taking it with them. We had fifth year seniors this year. So if someone's like, hey, I'm the Van Wilder. I'm like 7 years here and
Too
through high
fun.
school or whatever, we'll just have fun. And
That's
there's
awesome.
this real community around it. It's been fun to see.
Yeah, the content on there is always great. And you always have such phenomenal speakers on there. So thank you for all that you do for the HR community. All right, what's your mic drop moment, your piece of advice, summary statement that only Ben Eubanks could do?
I'll say this. I have worked as an HR leader. I wanted to be an HR when I was a kid. This is not an accident. I wanted to be here from the very beginning. We had time to get to that today, but I still have this same love. I believe that the work we do in HR is the most exciting, the most impactful, the most valuable thing that the business can do. That's why I'm so excited that this is called the human capitalist, because it really does get us to the people are the most important part of the business, most important resource of the business. And we have the responsibility and the opportunity to guide, lead, and direct them in a way that leads to their best, joyful work experience and amazing outcomes for the organization as well. That is the opportunity for HR. It's such a privilege, and I'm thankful to call myself part of that community.
Well, we are thankful to have you in it because only you can bring that kind of passion. Thank you again, Ben. I'm sure this is not going to be the last time you and I, we always have some kind of data point to talk on. So I foresee in 2025 me emailing you going, yeah, we're going to have to unpack this on the podcast. So I will see you very soon, but thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the impact you're having on the community, Trent. I appreciate it on behalf of all the listeners out there, and to all of you out there, keep up the good work.
Awesome. All right. And that is a wrap on another episode of The Human Capitalist. Thank you so much for choosing to tune in and invest your time with me today. You know, I hope that you walked away with some valuable insights and actionable strategies that you can maximize your greatest asset, and that's you. But hey, before you go, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so that way you can stay in the know. The human capitalist movement begins with you. If you have some feedback, feel free to leave it. I'll read every comment. I want to make sure that the content that I am delivering is what you want to hear. If you want to connect further, you can find me at my link down below. I'd love to hear from you and continue this awesome conversation. Well, this is Trent Cotton, your human capitalist, and I'm going to sign off. But remember, invest in yourself, own your potential, and keep building your human capital.